I woke in the dark, not a darkness made by absence of light, but a presence, thick, cold, heavy like wet stone on bare skin. The kind of dark that remembers your name before you ever learn to say it. I lay still for a moment, listened. The drip of ancient water, the shifting breath of the sea as it crashed against the cliff face, and beneath it all the soft rattle of bones caught in stone. I was home, Rookholm, the island, the wound. My name is Malacro, and though the years gnawed at the edges of time above, here I remained untouched, watching, waiting. I stood, my spine crackled like an avalanche. My limbs stretched far too long for any man. My fingers scraped the ceiling of the cavern, skin pale, death blue, glistening with seawater, veins black, bulging, alive. One eye glowed faint violet, the other a pit, a well of hunger that even light refused to enter. My mouth curled in a grin that had not been seen in 1,000 years. They had returned through the stone. I felt them, new blood, soft meat, a campfire, laughter, metal tools, human breath. The island had called them again, and they had answered, as they always did. I climbed, naked but for salt and rags, wet footprints steaming on ancient stone. I reached the surface in minutes. Despite the jagged climb, the sky was gray, the sea silver, and on the southern shore specks, boats, tents, human bodies setting up camp like ants building on a sleeping lion. I could crush them, twist them, swallow them in one motion. But no, not yet. I walked to the place. The stone slab, it waited, just as I'd left it weathered, moss-covered, nearly forgotten. I laid my hand upon it and felt the ancient hunger return, the need to write. My fingers elongated, nails darkened to obsidian. I carved, and the stone screamed. The first 5 rules etched themselves into the world again. 1. Do not laugh beneath a red sky. 2. Do not speak my name during an earth tremble. 3. Do not light fire on a rain-washed night. 4. Do not gaze into my right eye. 5. Do not pluck the flowers that bloom where the dawn first kisses the cliffs. The air changed. The island heard me, and so did the humans. I faded into shadow, watching them. They found a stone before sunset. A few gasped. One took a photo. Another, a fool, laughed and mimicked the carvings like some old world role play. I felt the pull, but I did nothing. Yet, over days, they built. Tents gave way to cabins. Generators hummed. Signal towers were raised and immediately failed. Phones did not work here. Internet flickered like candlelight in a storm. They called it a technical glitch. I called it obedience. The humans gave the land a name. Grimsa, meaningless. The island already had a name. Rookholm. It means place of the watcher. Their maps would never show it. Their satellites would never see it. But it existed in blood, in bone, in fear, in rules. I did not sleep, not for weeks. I watched, waited, and then as always one of them broke the first rule. His name was Hera, a large man, a hunter, leader of the new settlement. On the 10th evening, the sky blazed crimson not from sunset, but from something deeper, more primal, a warning. Hera dragged a deer to the fire pit, laughed, a booming, arrogant sound. Victory, celebration. His laughter rang across the island, and it reached me. I stepped forward. My hand rose. I whispered nothing. His chest imploded, not with sound, with suction, like his lungs turned inside out. Bone shattered from within. Skin tore like fruit dropped from a great height. His scream was silent, a perfect echo of his forbidden laugh. And then he was gone. A crater where his chest once was. Blood soaked the sand. The others screamed. Some ran, some fell. A few dropped to their knees. That was the moment the island took them, not with teeth, with fear. I smiled, because fear was worship, and worship made me real again. The blood of the hunters soaked into the sand like ink into ancient parchment. It hissed, It sizzled, and with every drop that disappeared beneath the soil of Rook home, I felt my strength coalesce. The first violation always tastes the sweetest. I watched them for hours after Hera fell. They buried him, not with honor, but in haste. No one dared speak of it, not directly. They whispered about aneurysms, a freak accident, some kind of animal attack. They were lying to each other, to themselves, but not to me. Their fear was real, and that was enough. For now, the stone slab became sacred overnight. They built a wooden frame over it to keep the rain off. Someone, a woman named Rowan, copied the symbols onto paper and pinned them to every tent door. They began to whisper the rules before sleep, like prayers. That was good. That was right. The rules are not for safety. They are for remembrance. And the more they remember, the more I exist. Seasons passed. Cabins replaced tents. Generators gave way to buried cables. Fishermen returned with strange catches, eyeless things that whispered when left in the sun too long. Children were born here, born beneath my shadow, and they were taught the rules before they were taught numbers. I watched from the cliffs. I knew them all. I knew their names, their faces, their dreams. I even visited them in those dreams. They don't remember, of course, but I do. In 2008, their machines began to change. Cell phones returned. Laptops hummed. Wi-Fi spread across the village, but only in select places. Places I allowed. They didn't understand why coverage stopped the moment they stepped outside. Why internet only worked between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Why their cameras glitched when pointed at the ocean. They called it interference, but it wasn't. It was me. A boy named Ellis asked the question aloud once. He was 9. If Malachron is real, he said, standing barefoot in front of the stone, why doesn't he just come say hi? The others gasped. His mother slapped him, but I was not angry. I admired him, and so I gave him a gift. That night, he dreamed of a forest made of glass. He stood in the clearing, and I appeared not as a monster, but as a man in a green coat, smiling. He laughed, said my name again, and I smiled back. But when he woke up the next morning, his tongue was gone, surgically removed. No pain, just absence. The village understood. Rule 12 was born. Do not mock the name, even in dreams. I carved it myself, into the stone, blood from my own hands. They saw the new symbol appear the next morning and screamed, but they understood and they obeyed. Years passed. Their worship grew, but worship from fear is still worship. They embroidered the rules onto their curtains. They etched them into doorknobs. They whispered them into baby ears. And I fed, not on flesh, on belief. And then she came, Elysia, tall, pale, sharp eyes and a sharper mind. A scientist, a skeptic, a woman born without fear in her bones. She joined the town during the rainy season. Said she wanted to observe the sociological structure of isolation-based myth systems. She was polite, smart, charming, and she was already breaking the rules. She lit a candle during a red sky. She painted on driftwood. She touched the stone with bare hands. The island tolerated it for a while, but not forever. The final straw came during the rain-asking ceremony. It was the 7th day of drought. All villagers wore the blue cloaks, gathered in the square, stood silently as the priest recited the 27th rule. Do not speak while the wind is absent. But Elysia, she sneezed, just a sneeze, just a moment, and it shattered everything. The wind was still, the sky held its breath, and I moved. The flame erupted from beneath the altar, not red, not orange, purple, cold as the bottom of the ocean. It coiled like a serpent and wrapped itself around her legs, then her torso, then her mouth. She screamed. The village screamed. The stone slab glowed. I watched her burn from the cliffs, and I let her live. The fire vanished. She fell, alive, but marked, twisted skin, one eye sealed shut, voice reduced to a rasp. but she was living, a warning made of flesh. They placed her beside the slab. Every child was made to touch her hand, to see what happens when the wind is disrespected. They understood Rule 27 was now sacred. That night it rained, soft, cold, clean. They cried with joy, but I wondered, did I send the rain? Or had I become so intertwined with their world that even the weather bowed? And if I had not sent the rain, who had? I stood above the cliffs that night as the rain fell. The sea stretched endless before me, black and churning, its waves carved not by wind, but by something older, something that knew how to breathe beneath the crust of time. The villagers danced below, in the square still stained by Elysia's suffering, their faces turned skyward, mouths open to catch each drop like sacred wine. They thought I had blessed them. They thought I had answered their plea. And for the first time in many long centuries, I wasn't sure if they were right. I returned to the cave before dawn. The stone slab pulsed softly in the dark, the symbols still wet from my most recent carving. The rules live now, not just etched but woven into the soil, into the bones of the land, into the collective breath of the island. But a question kept echoing in the back of my skull like a loose drumhead. What if the rain came from something else? Not from my will, not from their fear, but from another will. A parallel power. I should have been furious, but instead, I felt cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from the sea or wind, but a cosmic cold. The kind that exists in the space between two gods. The following days were silent. No violations, no new rules. Elysia remained alive but speechless, seated in the temple like a living statue. Some left fruit near her feet. Others whispered prayers, but I knew the village had reached its peak, and peaks always collapse. The fog came back first, not drifting, not creeping. It fell like a curtain, thick and immediate. The sun vanished. The sky turned gray and featureless. The ocean, once restless, was now still, dead still. They came on the third day of fog. A ship not fishing, not civilians, slipped from the horizon like a whisper. Its sails were black. Its hull bore no name, no flag, no anchor. I felt it before I saw it. It wasn't wood and iron. It was intent. A vessel built not to cross seas but to challenge borders. And when it docked, only one man disembarked. Tall, cloaked, hair the color of ash. He walked barefoot onto my island like he belonged there. Even from the cliffs, I felt it. He wasn't afraid. Not like the villagers, not even like Elysia, who had flirted with skepticism. This one didn't fear the rules, because he didn't believe they applied to him. And worse, I could sense he was right. His name came hours later, Lazarus. It passed through the villagers' mouths like a warning carried on broken glass. He didn't speak often, but when he did, his voice was steady, calm, the kind of calm that makes armies hesitate. He asked questions no one dared voice. Why do the rules change? Who carved them first? What power punishes and what power forgives? The villagers were cautious. Some were angry. A few were curious, but none stopped him. He visited the slab on his second night, alone. He knelt beside it, touched it. Nothing happened. No wind, no blood, no fire. Because I was watching, not punishing, not yet. He traced a finger over Rule 1. Do not laugh beneath a red sky. Then he laughed, quiet, controlled, like he was testing the weight of the commandment. Still no punishment. I trembled in my cave, not from weakness but from recognition. Because I had seen him before, not in flesh, but in dreams, in old dreams. He stood at the edge of time, in robes made of shadow and bone, his eyes silver with something that did not blink. He came before fire, before stone, before me. He was not against rules. He was older than them. He had walked the fields of broken gods and returned whole on the fourth day. Lazarus entered the temple. Elysia saw him. And for the first time since the fire she stood, their eyes locked. and something passed between them. Memory, recognition, or just the silent exchange of two souls who had both defied the same thing, me. That night, the sky turned red again, not crimson ultraviolet, a color that did not belong, and the rules on the slab changed, not by my hand, by theirs. Someone had carved a new one, a 34th rule, crude, fresh, still wet. Do not pretend that God is the only one who watches. I did not carve that. I did not allow that. And yet, the stone accepted it. It glowed. And in that glow, I saw what I feared most. A new faith. The island changed after that night. The rain ceased. The wind forgot its direction. Birds stopped their circling patterns in the sky. Even the insects, constant companions of shadow and rot, had grown quiet, as if they too were waiting. And the stone slab, my oldest mouthpiece, now bore a rule I had not written. Do not pretend that God is the only one who watches. I did not know how it was possible, but I knew who was responsible. Lazarus. He moved through the village like a slow illness, not spreading panic, spreading doubt. People no longer recited the rules before bed. Children hesitated before touching the slab on their way to school. Even Elysia, burned and broken, now followed him like a whisper with legs. Doubt is a virus. You see, it begins in the tongue, infects the ears, and before long it eats the soul. And when souls stop fearing you, you are no longer a god. You are a story. And I was never meant to be a story. On the 7th day of fog, the priests came to me. They didn't know it, but I heard them, their prayers, their bleeding palms. They were whimpering into wet corners of the temple. They begged me to act, to punish Lazarus, to remind the people who rules Rook home. I should have listened. Instead, I watched, and I made my worst mistake. Because on the 8th day, Lazarus violated Rule 9, the one that even I hadn't broken. Do not carve over the old rules. It was meant to protect the foundations of law itself. If one rule overwrites another, the structure crumbles. That's how the first gods died. And yet, there he was, chisel in hand, standing over the slab, and carving directly through Rule 5, the one that forbade picking the dawn flowers. I screamed, not aloud. The island screamed for me. Trees bent inward, stones cracked open. The wind recoiled as if in pain, but still no punishment came. Lazarus was untouched. The slab absorbed the new mark. And worse, the old rule faded like a chalk sketch in the rain. It was gone, forever. I staggered back, deeper into the cave. Even Leviac, sleeping beneath the roots of the cliffs, stirred uneasily. It was happening. The rules were not sacred anymore. They were suggestions, and Lazarus was tearing at them. One by one, that night, I appeared before the village. For the first time in over 3 centuries, I stood in the square, not a shadow, not a voice, but a shape, a presence. I dropped from the cliffs with no sound, landing upon stone with the knees that bent wrong and eyes that burned through the fog like twin galaxies collapsing. The crowd fell silent. Children hid behind their mothers. Elysia's hand trembled, and Lazarus just smiled. Finally, he said, stepping forward, a proper conversation. I said nothing, but my presence pushed back against him, a wind funneling around his body, a hurricane that only touched his skin. Still, he stood unmoving. He reached out, not in fear, in invitation. Let me show you, he whispered. I refused, but curiosity is older than fear, and I watched. Lazarus knelt and pressed his palm to the stone. There was no ceremony, no chant, just skin on rock, and then vision. The world tilted. I saw myself, long before I had a name, drifting beneath the sea, wrapped in silt and salt and sorrow. I saw others ancient, vast, shapeless. They watched over other lands, setting rules of their own. Some rules burned, some were sung, some were carried on the back of worms. But all of them had one thing in common. They were not eternal. They were inherited. And I, Malachron, was not the first, not the last. Just one god in a long chain of forgotten watchers. The vision passed. I recoiled. The crowd gasped. Lazarus stood slowly and said 4 words that undid a millennium. You are not alone. The priests wept. The children stared. The elders turned away. And I felt something crack in my chest. Not bone, not organ. Belief, their belief in me, was dying. I returned to the cave. I tore at the walls. I screamed into the stone. But the rules would not answer. They were not mine alone anymore. And for the first time in eons, I feared I was mortal. The days bled together. And the silence, oh, the silence was louder than any scream I had ever summoned from their throats. I stayed within the cave, curled beneath the ceiling's dripping jaw, my fingers tracing the oldest rules I had ever carved. They were fading, not just from the stone, but from memory. The villagers no longer chanted them in the square. Children no longer whispered them in their sleep. Even the fog seemed to forget who it belonged to. Lazarus had planted something far more dangerous than fire or steel. An idea. And ideas are harder to kill than men. On the 12th night, I emerged again, not to punish, to remember. I walked through the forest, brittle leaves crunching underfoot like old paper. The sky was cloudless. The moon was gone. Even the stars which once bent in unnatural spirals over Rookholm were still, as if they, too, were holding their breath. I reached the place I had not visited in centuries, a pit, circular, walled in roots that bled sap like tears. The wound, it was older than me. I had sealed it with 9 rules layered like stone, 1 to bind, 1 to mute, 1 to sleep, and 6 more to forget. Because what slumbers there does not know language. It knows only hunger. And now, I feared it might be waking. Lazarus had not broken those rules yet, but I could feel him circling them. He was not just dismantling belief, he was unearthing history. Back in the village, things had changed, not violently, subtly. They no longer called me the Great Watcher. They whispered my name like a habit they were trying to quit. And worse, they had begun to speak of alternatives. New myths, new gods, or worse, no gods at all. Elysia now walked without her veil. The scars on her face no longer a warning, but a symbol of survival. They asked her for advice. Not me, she smiled now. And that smile was more dangerous than any ritual I had ever outlawed. The children played games beside the slab, not reverently, playfully. They traced my sacred glyphs in chalk. One boy even drew horns over my name. And I did nothing, because they didn't believe I could. That's when Lazarus carved the next rule. Rule 35. It wasn't a prohibition. It was a question, who benefits from fear? It was burned into the slab by a flame I did not control. No hands carved it, no blood spilled. It just appeared. And when it did, the slab shook. Cracks bloomed across its face. The glyphs shimmered like fish scales in dying light. And from somewhere deep below in the wound, something answered. Not in words, in hunger. That night, the sea withdrew, not the tide, the entire ocean. It slunk away from Rookholm like a beast ashamed of its own leash. Fishermen woke to dry sand stretching miles beyond the cliffs. They walked across the exposed seabed, finding things that should not be found. Altars, skeletons, teeth, statues with no faces. One child found a mask carved from glass that wept ink when touched. The villagers brought these things back. Of course, because humans are always bringing back the things meant to stay buried. I waited for them to stop. They didn't, so I acted. In the dead of night, I walked into their dreams. One by one, I showed them the wound open. I showed them Leviac awake. I showed them Rookholm gone. Some woke screaming. Some didn't wake at all. By dawn, the village was silent. Smoke rose from 3 chimneys. 15 were dead. The official story was carbon monoxide. But they knew. They all knew. And Lazarus, he sat in the square, carving not into the slab, into wood, a totem, a new god, shapeless, nameless, made of driftwood and bone, and the soft husk of belief no longer needed. He saw me. He nodded. He said, "It's not that you aren't real. It's that you aren't necessary anymore." And in that moment, I understood. This was not just a war for worship. It was a war for relevance, and I was losing. So I returned to the wound, and for the first time in 10,000 years, I whispered its name. The name I spoke was not one made for human throats. It was carved in soundless pressure, the kind that cracks ice from the inside. A name not spoken but bled. The moment I uttered it, the island trembled not at the surface, but from the roots of the world. The wound opened, not like a mouth, like a memory. It did not yawn or roar. It simply became a widening absence in the forest floor where color vanished and sound distorted. Everything near it bent: trees, stones, insects pulled toward the center of gravity that was not a hole, but a hunger that remembered its purpose. I stood before it, and the air around me thickened like syrup laced with salt and dust. My chest tightened. Even my shadow tried to crawl backward, but I remained because I had made a mistake, and now I would try to correct it. The wound was not my creation. It was a consequence. When the first gods fought, they did not bleed, they shed laws, and those laws became things. Some were harmless. Others had to be buried, and the wound was where we buried the worst of them. One of them, I never dared name it, had survived. And now, it heard Lazarus. I knew what it wanted. It didn't crave blood. It didn't want to rule. It wanted to rewrite, to unmake every rule carved by hand or God, to replace worship with instinct, and if it woke fully, Rookholm would not burn or drown. It would cease, as if it had never existed. I turned away from the wound and returned to the slab, but it was too late. Lazarus had carved another rule. Rule 36. There is no such thing as divine punishment, only consequences we don't understand yet. The villagers now gathered around him as if he were the prophet. They brought him gifts, listened to his stories. Some even burned their old parchment copies of my rules. I should have struck him down. I still could, but the moment I lifted my hand, I hesitated. And that moment was all it needed. The sky split, not with lightning, with silence. A fracture across the atmosphere, like a crack in glass. The birds froze mid-flight. The waves stopped. The color drained from the villagers' clothes, and the wound spoke, not with words, with memory. Suddenly, everyone remembered things that had never happened, alternate histories, lifetimes that unraveled backward. Villagers saw themselves building a city here 1,000 years ago. Others saw themselves fighting me and winning. Time broke, and through the crack, the unruled stepped. It had no face, only suggestion. A storm shaped like agreement, a shadow made of forgotten intentions. It looked like everything they had ever wanted and never needed, and they welcomed it. Lazarus knelt, not in reverence and respect. I didn't summon it, he said. I revealed it. I lunged, but my power struck nothing. The unruled had no form to strike. It was the absence between strikes. Then the slab split, right down the middle, not from pressure, from irrelevance. My first rule, the one I had etched with blood from my own tongue, crumbled like damp parchment, and a new rule etched itself across the broken face. Rules are made to be survived. I fell to my knees. For the first time in millennia, I wept, not because I was dying, because I was becoming something else. Not a god, not a monster, a remnant, a cautionary tale told by those who once feared me. The villagers didn't run. They didn't cry. They watched. As the unruled began to move toward the sea, its form dissolving into mist and suggestions, and with it, so did their memory of me. Lazarus turned to me one last time and whispered, "You should have taught them freedom instead of fear." Then he walked into the sea, and the waves returned to meet him. The next morning, the island bloomed. Flowers I had long forbidden now grew from the stone. Children played without shadows. The slab lay in two pieces, covered in moss, and somewhere deep beneath the roots, the wound waited. I awoke beneath the surface, not in my cave, not even within the roots of Rook Home. I was deeper, buried in a silence so total it carved grooves into thought. No light reached me, no sound, no time, just the steady, slow breathing of the wound, now pulsing above me like a wounded sun. And in that dark, I realized something terrifying. I was no longer part of the island. I was beneath it, outside its memory, its rules, its need. On the surface, the world had changed. The villagers had built a new monument, not of stone, but of glass, clear, towering, and hollow, a mirror facing skyward. It reflected nothing but the clouds. They no longer followed carved commandments. They followed intuition, no formal rituals, no sacred text, only whispers carried in dreams and fog, shaped by consensus, not decree. Elysia led them, scarred, limping, yet radiant. She spoke gently, not with commands, but with stories. Stories about balance, mistakes, understanding. She never mentioned me by name, but in every tale, I could feel my shadow lingering just behind the words. They still feared the deep places of the island, but not because of what I had taught them, because of what they had uncovered. They fenced off the wound, surrounded it with salt and sand and solar panels. One child called it the edge of the story. He wasn't wrong. And Lazarus, gone. No body, no boat, just a cairn by the sea, with no inscription. Some say he walks the ocean floor. Others say he became part of the unruled. Me, I believe he never existed at all, and also that he was the only real thing that ever did. But here beneath the wound, I was not gone. Not yet, because belief does not die when it's forgotten. It calcifies, it sinks, it waits. I reached out, touching the sediment. It shimmered. My fingers left behind streaks of absence. No color, no reflection, a kind of anti-memory. And from the far corner of this vast nothing, something answered. Not Leviac, not the unruled, something older. I had feared Lazarus because he showed them a truth I had buried. The gods are not born, they are elected by necessity. But this thing, this presence in the sediment had no interest in being chosen. It simply was. And I understood the final horror. I had been guarding the wrong secret. The wound wasn't a tomb. It was a keyhole. And now, there was no door left to lock. On the 21st night after my fall, a girl wandered too close to the fenced wound. She carried a seashell pressed to her ear, as if listening for stories. She whispered to it, and the sediment shifted. I saw her, even from the deep. Her shadow cast no silhouette. Her breath made no mist. She was not marked like the others. She was not afraid. The wound rippled, and in that moment, I realized they had not freed themselves from my rules. They had simply become ripe for a new one. The thing in the deep whispered its own command. It was not in words or symbols. It was in design. The way veins branch through leaves. The pattern of cracks in drying mud. The formation of clouds before a tornado. A natural law waiting to be made conscious. And the girl, she understood it. Children always do. They are closer to the threshold, less burdened by memory, more willing to believe in something that hasn't yet been defined. She returned the next day, then the next. Soon others followed, not with fear, with curiosity. They did not build shrines. They built questions, and a thing below answered. Each time, subtly, a flash of light, a voice in sleep, a new glyph appearing in frost across glass. And so, a new rule was born. No slab, no blood, no declaration, just a shift. Invisible, inevitable, irrevocable. And I watched, not as a god, not as a guardian, but as a witness, and for the first time in eternity, I felt awe. It began with the rain, but not the kind I summoned, not the thunder that bent trees, or the acidic drizzle that scarred stone. This rain was gentle, unnaturally so, each droplet perfectly round, each one falling with the exact same rhythm, a slow, deliberate beat, like a countdown. The girl, her name was Eileen, stood barefoot in the clearing near the wound. She held no offerings. She recited no rites. She simply listened, as if the patter of the rain were language, and perhaps it was. I watched her from below, not with eyes I had long abandoned those, with perception, with gravity, with the tension of everything I once ruled, pressing upward against the membrane between then and now. And I knew this truth. Eileen was being taught, not like a student, like an heir. The villagers spoke less now, not out of fear, but because they were listening. Too, the island had grown quiet, not dead, just expectant, like lungs held between breaths. One night, the wound pulsed. Every bird on the island fell from the sky, not dead, sleeping. Even the insects curled in silence, their wings folding inward like prayer hands. And in the square, without alarm or chaos, the people gathered. Eileen stood before them, only 6 years old, eyes wide, hair dripping with rain, no crown, no robe, only presence. She opened her hand. Inside was a stone, smooth and black. When she spoke, the words were not her own. There was a rule before rules. She said it calmly, like she was telling a story at a campfire, and it said, "Know what you are not." If a murmur ran through the crowd, and the air shifted. What followed was not prophecy, it was remembering. Each person felt it differently. One man fell to his knees, screaming a name he had never heard before. A woman turned and vomited black sand onto the ground. A child began humming a tune no one had taught her, but all of them recognized memories not from this life, not even from this world. Echoes. Eileen was the vessel, and the rule she now carried was pro-human. That night, they buried the old slab, not as rebellion, as release, and with it, they buried the names of every rule I had made, including mine. I did not fight it, not anymore, because I began to feel something familiar, not worship, not fear, a current running through the soil, the stone, the roots, and through it, I heard the voice again, not Eileen's, not the unruled, the source. It told me what I already suspected. The wound was not a prison, it was a seed, and I was the one who had fertilized it over centuries of dominance, obedience, blood, and law. I had made the soil ripe, and now the tree was ready to grow. The island began to change shape. Subtly, paths realigned, caves opened that no one remembered sealing. Stars above Rookholm arranged themselves into unfamiliar constellations. And most importantly, time itself slowed. Not everywhere, just here. Rookholm became a pocket, a fold in the blanket of the world, tucked away from history, but not from what comes next. And what came walking, not in ships, not in robes, not in flame or thunder. It walked through dreams first. A man dreamed of drowning in feathers. A woman dreamed her bones were made of keys. A child dreamed her voice could turn water into honey. And then, one morning, the sea opened, not parted, open like a door, and they arrived. The echo born, they had no names, only functions. They did not speak, they sang. Their bodies were patterned, not with features, but with memories. Some looked like lost lovers, others like animals from forgotten myths. One wore a face that flickered between Malacron and Eileen. I reached toward them from the deep, and one stopped, looked directly at me, smiled, and said in the old tongue, "You did well, but it is no longer your world to bind." And so I drifted deeper, past memory, past name, past self, and for the first time I was free. At first, the echo-born did not interfere. They simply watched. From rooftops, from the treetops, from reflections, they would appear at the edges of sight, not hidden, just unacknowledged, like déjà vu, and the villagers adjusted, not with terror, with an eerie, graceful acceptance, as though they had always known this day would come, or perhaps remembered it backward. Aileen no longer played in the fields. She wandered the paths barefoot, tracing spirals into the dirt with a willow branch. Sometimes she'd speak to animals, other times to empty space, but she always seemed to be listening, and whatever she heard, she obeyed. A new structure began to form at the heart of Rook Home, not built by hands, by agreement. It wasn't voted on, it wasn't designed. It simply appeared piece by piece, dream by dream. Each morning, more of it stood, walls woven from branches, ceilings of fog held in place by forgotten prayers, doors that opened not by hinge, but by invitation. They called it the memory house. Inside, reality bent. A hallway led to your childhood bedroom even if you had never had one. A window showed your mother, brushing your hair, though she'd been dead 20 years. One room was filled with the scent of a lie you told once and never forgave yourself for. It was alive, but not sentient, responsive. Like the island itself had decided to remember you. Instead of the other way around, the echo-born became guides, not prophets, interpreters. They would enter the memory house and emerge changed. One with a limp that matched a story someone had whispered in sleep. Another with eyes the color of a forgotten lake. And always, they returned to Elon, who marked their transformations in a small notebook bound in silence. No one taught anymore. There were no schools, no rules, only stories. Children grew wise, adults grew kind, but beneath it all, something old stirred. Not me, not anymore. I had become background, a myth among myths. Sometimes Aileen would mention me, but never with fear. She'd say, once there was a keeper of rules. He loved order so much he became it. They'd nod, they'd smile, then move on. But there was a door inside the memory house no one would open, not even Elin. It was etched in something older than language, not letters, not symbols, consequences. And though it never moved, everyone knew it waited. Until one day, it opened by itself. Inside, there was no room, no floor, no space, only a mirror, black, smooth, infinite. And in it was me, or the idea of me, not Malachron, not the god, not the rule maker, just the shape of punishment. Alien stepped inside, alone. She did not flinch. She did not bow. She simply asked one question. Are you still angry? I didn't answer with words. I couldn't. But the mirror rippled, and for a moment, she saw everything. The forging of the first rule. The moment I realized I was worshipped not for my wisdom, but for their fear. The silence that followed each sacrifice. The loneliness. Aileen reached out, touched the mirror, and whispered, "You're allowed to rest now." And for the first time, I did. The door sealed behind her, and the island breathed, not with relief, with balance. From that day, no echo-born was seen again. The memory house faded, becoming mist by dawn. Eileen remained. She didn't lead. She reminded of what we were, of what we could become, of what rules were always meant to be, temporary. The sea began whispering again, not in language, in rhythm. 3 waves in, 1 out, then 5, then 13, then silence, like counting, like code. Eileen stood at the edge of the shore each morning, eyes closed, feet sinking into wet sand. She wasn't praying, she was translating. I no longer watched her from the deep. There was no deep anymore, not in the way it used to be. The island had unfolded itself, like a note passed from one century to another, smoothed open, read aloud, and what lay beneath was not horror, it was origin. One night, Aileen walked into the water, fully clothed, no fanfare, no witnesses. She did not float, she descended, not like sinking, more like returning, like gravity had flipped just for her. Below the surface, the water did not burn her eyes. She could breathe, and the deeper she went, the brighter it became, until she reached the bottom of memory. There, half buried in silt and coral, lay a door, not like the one in the memory house. This was older, angular, metallic, humming softly like a lullaby from a forgotten machine. Etched across its surface were words in no human tongue, but Eileen could feel their meaning. Authority is a function of belief. She touched it, and it opened. Inside was a chamber, spherical, silent. The walls were covered in veins of gold and glass. Tiny lights blinked across their surfaces, not randomly, but as if breathing. In the center was a cradle, empty, except for a single object. A book, not a book of pages, of moments. When Eileen placed her hands on it, she saw everything. Malachron's first breath, the carving of the first rule, the rise and collapse of entire civilizations around ancient, buried commandments, the echo-born, seeded across time like spores, waiting, herself not born, but summoned, because Eileen was never meant to rule. She was meant to witness the final version of belief. The book whispered to her, everything was once written, but not everything must stay written. She understood. She had the power to unwrite. Above, the island paused. Birdsong ceased. Clouds stopped drifting. Even fire flickered in place. Rookholm was watching, waiting. Would she do it? Would she erase the story? Eileen turned one final page and saw nothing. A blank space. The only unwritten rule. The rule before rules. She dipped her fingers into the last blank and with breath held, wrote, "We are a great reality, not because of what we command, but because of what we forgive." And the sea closed. The chamber faded, and Eileen rose. When she stepped onto the beach, morning had arrived, but something was different. Time had restarted. Forward, the villagers knew. Not by speech, not by vision. They simply remembered differently. There were no more rules, only stories, and stories could now change. The statues of Malachron had vanished. Even his name had drifted from conversation, not erased, released, like exhaling after holding your breath for too many lifetimes. Eileen did not become a queen, nor a prophet. She became a gardener, planting not just crops, but ideas. Each child she taught learned how to tell stories, not obey them, and beneath it all, buried deep in the sediment of unspoken things, I felt gratitude. The boat came without sound, no engine, no sails, no wake. It simply appeared at the edge of Rookholm's view like a thought remembered too late, and on board were 3 outsiders. The villagers watched from the hills, silent, not afraid, not anymore, but attuned, because something about these newcomers felt sharp, like paper cuts hidden inside paper maps. They stepped onto the beach with confidence. All 3 wore bright, dry clothes, boots without mud, eyes without history. They carried not weapons, but instruments, a handheld scanner that buzzed at every stone, a notebook filled with drawings of places they had never been, a small silver disc that pulsed whenever someone spoke. They did not introduce themselves by name. They introduced themselves by purpose. "We're here to validate the myth." Eileen approached them alone. She carried no weapon, just a seed wrapped in cloth. She did not smile, but she didn't warn them either. They asked questions, so many questions. What energy signature surrounds the island? Can you confirm the presence of archaeosentient structures? Did someone teach you to speak in metaphor? Or is that environmental? Eileen answered only once. You won't find what you're looking for unless you accept that it's already found you. They didn't write that one down. The villagers kept their distance, not in fear, in respect, because something old stirred beneath the soil again. But it wasn't Malachron. It wasn't even the source. It was interpretation, the most dangerous force of all. The outsiders set up devices, drilled small holes, collected air samples, analyzed the patterns in bird migration and rain evaporation, and slowly, they began telling their own version of Rook Home, one that didn't match the stories, one that didn't fit, one that made the island nervous. Eileen watched a fox walk backward through a field, watched fire flicker in reverse. Reality was fraying, not breaking, but curling at the edges, because conflicting belief is not a war, it's erosion, and the more the outsiders measured, the more the island forgot what it had agreed to be. They found the buried slab, the one that once held Malachron's first rules. One touched it and smiled. It's a control schema. He looked at Eileen like he had solved her. This place was never supernatural, just an experiment in perception feedback loops. You're a participant, a variable. She said nothing, but the seed in her hand grew warm. That night, the first storm in years struck Rook Home, but not from the sky, from the ground. The soil pulsed, the trees sang, the wound whispered its first words since Eileen's descent. They have not earned the story. And then the fog returned, not the comforting veil of mist the villagers knew. This fog was ancient, the kind that rewrites trails. Unbuilt homes, unnames the dead. One of the outsiders vanished, left behind only a single boot and a spiral of symbols drawn into the sand symbols that Eileen recognized from the chamber. Symbols she'd chosen not to write down. The remaining two argued. One wanted to leave. The other wanted to stay and publish. He never got the chance. The villagers didn't stop him. The island did. Eileen planted the seed the next morning, not as defense, as a reminder, because every story has limits, even the ones meant to grow forever. And what grew from that seed was not a tree. It was a boundary, invisible, silent, absolute, a story that could only be told from within, not extracted. Not packaged, not sold. The last outsider left on foot. He walked the coastline for 4 days before finding a path back to the dock. The boat he came in was gone, but a new one waited. Plain, wooden, still. Inside, a note. You were not wrong, but you were too early. He left without another word. Rook Home healed, but the wound beneath it never closed again. Because it wasn't supposed to. Some stories must stay open, so they can be changed by those who live them. The new children did not ask for bedtime stories. They told them each night in the communal hall, where the lanterns flickered low, and the windows showed stars not seen anywhere else on earth. The children sat in circles and invented tales. Tales of kindness, of wild gods who forgot how to be cruel, of places that changed shape based on who entered them. And Eileen listened, never correcting, never guiding, only recording. Not on paper, in seed stones small. Smooth stones passed hand to hand, absorbing words like warmth. One boy, Ashen, never told stories. He listened with such intensity it unnerved the others. He would close his eyes and hum, tilting his head like tuning into a distant frequency. He once said, "I'm not hearing voices, I'm hearing memory that hasn't happened yet." Eileen did not dismiss him. She gave him a stone, darker than the rest, and when Ashen held it, it glowed dimly, a heartbeat, just one. That night, Ashen wandered into the woods. He wasn't lost. The woods had long since ceased being dangerous. No wild beasts, no cursed paths, only silence, except he heard something faint, like humming but older than sound, a pressure behind reality. He followed it. By morning, the villagers awoke to the first sign of rupture in years. A spiral burned into the meadow. At its center lay Ashen stone, now cracked, and beside it, a note etched into bark. "We must return to the place before rules, or they will right themselves again." Eileen knew what it meant. The stories were healing, yes, but stories, too, seek power. Even those told with kindness can become prisons when believed too tightly. And Ashen, he had found the beginning. there was a place none of them had dared go, not forbidden, just forgotten. The southern cliffs, where once a storm-shaped cave had collapsed into the sea, or so they thought. But now, it was open again. The wind no longer howled through it. It whispered. Aileen took no followers, only a single lantern and Ashen's cracked stone. The villagers watched her walk toward the southern cliffs. They did not stop her, because they knew she wasn't leaving to protect the island. She was leaving to protect the story of the island. The cave was deeper than before. It no longer smelled of salt. It smelled of origin, of the moment before choice, when everything was potential. And there, etched into the walls, were glyphs no one had ever seen. Shapes that predated letters. Shapes that looked like possibility frozen in place. The cracked stone pulsed in her hand. The lantern flickered out, but there was still light. It came from a head, not fire, not glow, but a presence. Not like Malakron, not like the Echo-born. This one had no form, no intention. It simply was. Aileen stepped forward, and it spoke. Not loud, not in her mind, in everything. Do you remember why rules were written? She whispered. To make meaning from fear. The presence responded. Then do you remember why they must be broken? Aileen closed her eyes. Ashen's face appeared in her mind. The spiral, the stories, and she answered. Because meaning must move. The presence pulsed once, and Aileen fell, not down. Through when she awoke. The cave was gone. She stood in a field that felt like Rook home, but wasn't. The air shimmered with stories, not told, not remembered, but waiting. She was no longer a gardener. She was now a cartographer of belief. Back on Rook home, the villagers dreamed of her return. And in their dreams, she wasn't older, wasn't crowned, wasn't divine. She was simply walking, always walking, on paths that didn't exist until she stepped on them. The stories would continue, but this time, they would not be carved in stone. They would be whispered to the wind. Ashen stopped speaking after Aileen vanished. He did not mourn. He waited. Each day, he sat at the edge of the spiral burned into the meadow, not inside it, not touching it, just near, listening, not for words, for echoes. He began gathering stones again, but these were different. They weren't smooth or warm. They were jagged, cold to the touch. Some had holes straight through the center. Others hummed when held under moonlight. He called them possibility shards. No one else dared touch them. One night, Ashen took the shards to the eastern hill, where the soil was soft and the stars aligned like a question. He placed them in a pattern, not a spiral, a map, but not of the island, of something beneath it, something older. The next morning, the villagers awoke to a strange sound. Speech, coming from the stones, not loud, whispered, not in a known language but understood, like a memory you never lived. And it said, the last story has not yet been written, but it has already been felt. Ashen didn't flinch. He simply nodded. He'd been expecting this. The shard spoke again the following night. This time, not to him. To everyone, no mouth. Just presence. A sound like breathing through glass. She is walking the pages, but the ink fades. You must choose. Write again or remember wrongly. The meaning wasn't immediate, but the fear was, because the villagers realized something chilling. They were forgetting the rules once carved into stone, now erased. The memories passed from voice to voice, now hollowing. Some children couldn't remember who Malakron had been. Some didn't even recall the name Aileen. Even the sky above them seemed thinner, as if reality had pages missing. Ashen convened the village. He stood in the middle of the spiral this time, finally stepping into it, and said only one thing. We must unwrite everything, to keep anything. The oldest among them wept, not in resistance, in recognition. They'd always known the story would end. They just didn't know it would choose them to end it. The villagers began preparing, but not for war, not for exodus, for translation. Each family offered a single object: a comb from a grandmother who no longer remembered her name, a shell from a shore that no longer existed, a page from a journal with no ink, but still damp with meaning. Ashen placed each item among the shards, and each time a new word was spoken, not in their language, but in theirs, the ones beneath the island, the ones who had always listened. That night, a portal opened, not in the sky, not underground, within. The villagers didn't see it. They felt it, like a second heartbeat. Ashen stepped through first. He didn't disappear. He expanded. His form stretched, became translucent like a story rising from a page. And then he was gone, one by one. The others followed, some with smiles, some with fear, all with acceptance, because they understood now. Reality isn't a place, it's a permission. By dawn, Rookholm was empty, not abandoned, released. The cliffs stood taller, the trees bent inward, as if bowing, and the wind, once filled with old commandments, now whispered, "Begin again." Far beyond what maps could hold, a new world stirred, one not ruled, not protected, only lived, and Ashen stood at its center, holding the last possibility shard, which no longer whispered, it sang. The new world did not begin with light, it began with questions, not spoken aloud, not asked by mouths, but hanging everywhere like fog woven from wonder. Ashen stood in the center of a place with no center, a plane of shifting color, where every step rewrote the horizon. He wasn't alone, but those around him were not people. They were fragments. They looked like beings drawn from unfinished dreams. One had a face that kept changing: your mother, a stranger, a version of yourself. Another was just a cloak made of yes and maybe. The third hovered like smoke in the shape of an apology. Ashen didn't fear them. He recognized them. They were unwritten belief, thoughts that never became law, memories no one ever claimed, meanings born in forgotten seconds. They surrounded him, but did not touch. Instead, they spoke without sound. "You are the last true teller," Ashen answered, not with words but with presence. He opened his palms and let the final shard float upward. It glowed, it spun, it split into three. One drifted to the first fragment, it became shape. The second merged with the cloak, it became sound. The third entered the smoke, it became truth. Together, they became form. The fragments knelt and said in one voice, "We are the pages, you are the ink." Ashen realized then what Elin had only begun. This world wasn't a continuation, it was a reboot. Not a blank slate but a fertile one. Not escape but invitation. A place where story was not enforced but collaborated. And yet, something trembled at the edge. Not all fragments wanted to be completed. Some enjoyed being half known. Some whispered of the original rule, the first one ever carved. Older even than Malachrome, a story, once believed, will seek survival, even against its own teller. Ashen ventured further. Each step reshaped the landscape. Mountains rose, then curled into rivers. Trees sang. Time hiccuped, paused, rewound, and laughed. And then he found it, a crack, not in ground. In consistency, it pulsed. It leaked rules, old ones no one had spoken in years. Do not name the rain. Do not build when the earth forgets your name. Do not open the seventh voice. Ashen knelt by the crack and whispered, "I didn't bring you here." The rules whispered back, "But you never stopped needing us." It was the truth he had feared. Even in a world built on freedom, the desire for order returns, sometimes in whispers, sometimes in stone. He had to choose. Close the crack, erase the memory of rule altogether, or open it and negotiate. Ashen did neither. He invited it. He placed the three fragments beside the crack and said, "Tell your version, but only if it can listen in return." The rules pulsed once, then shifted. No longer commandments, but questions. Will you name the rain? What does the earth remember you by? Do you want to open the seventh voice? Ashen smiled. The world inhaled. The air shimmered, and far in the distance, a lighthouse made of silence appeared on the horizon. Its beam cut not through darkness, but through assumption. He knew where to go next, because every great reality, every living truth, must learn to ask, what if we were wrong? And only then can a story grow again. The lighthouse pulsed once every 13 heartbeats. Ashen didn't count. He felt it, like a second spine growing along his back, not painful, just purposeful. It wasn't made of bricks or beams. It was made of unspoken realization, a tower built not to warn, but to remind. As Ashen approached, the air became weightless. He no longer walked, he navigated. The landscape didn't resist him, it anticipated him, because he wasn't just a traveler now. He was the record. Inside the lighthouse, there were no stairs, no flame, just walls covered in names. Not names like Elin or Malachrome, not proper, not remembered. Intentions. The one who listened too late, the one who made forgiveness into food, the one who asked without expecting an answer. Each name glowed when he passed and dimmed after. At the top, there was no lens, only a mirror. It showed no reflection, only the story so far. Ashen saw everything. Rook Holmes' first sacrifice, the spiral of belief, Alien's soft refusal to become a god, Lazarus, the unraveling, the rewriting. He placed his hand on the glass. It pulsed with a question. Will you let the story end? He whispered, no. Then louder, but I will let it rest. The lighthouse dimmed. Outside, the fragments began dissolving, not in death, but in completion. No longer half-truths, now footnotes to freedom. The world reshaped around them. No more shifting colors. No more laws disguised as suggestions. Only possibility made hospitable. Ashen turned from the lighthouse and found a village waiting. Not Rook Home, not built yet, but gathered. People young, bold, familiar, new, sitting in a circle, like the children used to, waiting for someone to begin. Ashen sat in the middle. He reached into his satchel and removed the 3 fragments, now smooth, quiet, and whole. He said nothing at first, just looked at them all. Then, softly, what of this time? We write it together. A woman raised her hand. She wore a cloak of dusk. Her voice trembled. Can I start? Ashen smiled and passed her the shard. She took it in both hands and began. Once there was a world that didn't know how to speak, so it learned to listen first, and the others followed, each adding a line, each adding truth, no one seeking control, only continuation, somewhere deep beneath the soil. The last memory of Malacron sighed, not in defeat, in relief. He had been necessary, so were the rules, but necessity is not the same as permanence, and permanence is not the same as meaning. Ashen closed his eyes that night to the sound of shared laughter. Not worship, not warning, just the ordinary miracle of people learning how to be in the sky above. The stars rearranged one last time, not into prophecy, not into Mappa, but into a question. What kind of world shall we become? And for the first time in all of creation, the answer wasn't written by a god, or a ghost, or a guardian. It was written by everyone, together.